Good afternoon, folks. Everybody get enough lunch in them? Everybody in party mode for tonight? Everybody going tonight? Who's going tonight? Most of you? Good, good. Because, I mean, that's the best part. Well, besides the knowledge that you're going to gain, tonight's going to be, I don't even know what it is because Steve, he won't tell anyone. I try to get drinks into them and everything, and I can never find anything about this party until we get there. But I've been here 4 years in a row. And he's always surprised me and blown me away with every event. So I don't think anybody, how many people have, this is a repeat event for them? All right, so you know what he's capable of. Okay, so who knows what it's going to be tonight, but I know with Steve setting it up, it's going to be a good time. So I just want to make sure you guys get food in you before you leave today. Make sure you grab some lunch and make sure you continue to eat all day, just in case you partake in some bevies tonight. We're going to talk about Office web apps, integrating Office web apps. There's some changes that are between 2010 and 2013 that you need to be familiar with, so we're going to introduce those. First, my name's Brian Alderman. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, way the other side of the country. Anybody else here from the U.S.? All right. Where are you from? Maryland? So you're barely in the U.S., but you're over there. All right, that's good. Well, welcome. You're the first one. I was in here yesterday. And I had 150 people, and there was no one. I talked to a couple other speakers last night, and no one was from the U.S., so it's good. Welcome. So I live in Arizona. I have my own company called Microtech. I do training, writing. I'm actually handing off a book for SharePoint 2010 to the next speaker. I'm working on SharePoint 2013 admin book as we speak. Well, not as we speak this moment, but in the evenings and everything when I'm not working on my slide decks. I'm one of those that make changes to the slide deck up to the last minute. It's like, oh, I should add that, I should add that. Literally, that's why the screen went blank a few minutes ago, because I decided one more bullet I wanted to throw on one of my slides. So I work on presenting, consulting, training, and writing are the four primary things I do. I try to play golf. That's the reason I moved to Arizona, so I could play golf more. But work has been getting in the way of that. So we're going to talk about today, we're going to give you an overview of what OWA is. It's Office Web Apps, and they were pretty straightforward in 2010. I'll do a comparison of what they were and how they worked in 2010 versus 13. We'll also take a look at some terminology. It's alphabet soup on one of our slides here where it's just a bunch of acronyms. We'll talk about those. We'll look at some deployment and configuration considerations. I've kind of pre-cooked some of the steps that were to make sure I've got enough time to get through the hour. So I pre-cooked some of the steps already, but I'll show you what I've done. And because you don't want to see me fat finger and try to type in front of you, I've actually created a little file where I'm going to cut and paste the commands as I need to use those commands. So you'll see as we configure the farm, both in the SharePoint, the OWA farm, when I say that, by the way, and the SharePoint farm, you'll see what those commands are. So we're going to set that up. We're going to stand up a farm, an OWA farm, and then we're going to configure SharePoint. There's not a lot to do in SharePoint side of it, the SharePoint farm, but we'll talk about that. We'll look at some maintenance, and then we'll look at some troubleshooting, some basic troubleshooting tips, where you find the logs specific for the OWA farm, and then we'll wrap it up with just a few best practices if you're going to roll this out. Has anybody rolled out the OWA in 2013 world yet? How'd it go? It's pretty smooth, pretty straightforward? I'm sorry? Oh, the update came out this month. All right, so I like what they've done with it, and when you get into it, I think you'll like it as well. So make sure you stay current with the updates. So, I'm sorry? There's a Windows update that applies itself and breaks it. Oh, there's a Windows update. Oh, I got it. So how many people have auto Windows update turned on? Good answer. Nice. I don't turn on anything that auto updates anything. It's almost, who was it? Steve was presenting the other day, or someone was presenting the other day. I was like, hey, do you want to do an update right now? It was 2012, server 2012. Do you want to do an update? No, I'd rather not, thank you. I do have it remind me when it updates already, so that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Pretty much, I have a 2-month rule. I don't care if it's SQL Server or if it's SharePoint, so I work with SQL Server as well. If it's Windows, if it's my operating system at home, I have a 2-month rule. I'm not going to apply any update till everybody else apply it, figure out what's broken, and let Microsoft fix it with a hot fix or something like that. So unless you have a critical situation that you have to have applied immediately, chill out, enjoy your weekend when a hot fix comes out or a CU comes out. Let somebody else who has nothing else to do crank that out, update that, cumulative update, or install it, figure out what's broken, get a report of Microsoft, let Microsoft patch the patch, and then you can apply the patch. So that way it's easier for you. That's my rule of thumb. So OWA, Office Web Apps, it's browser-based applications for Word, for Excel, for PowerPoint, and for OneNote. I don't know OneNote well enough. I really need to take a day and sit down and learn OneNote. So I'm going to probably ask Chris about that someday. But those 4 applications, instead of having to install it on everyone's desktop, we can actually configure what's called an OWA farm. So what I'm saying is SharePoint or OWA is no longer integrated with SharePoint. So when you install SharePoint, you now need to go out and create another type of farm called an OWA farm. Now the good news is, part of it's free. If you just have documents that are out there, those 4 types of documents you want individuals to be able to view, no problem. You installed OWA, you configure it as we're about to configure it, and your users can view it. If you want them to modify content, though, you need to go through some licensing. I think I mentioned yesterday's session that Microsoft's not only a software company, but they're bigger on a licensing company. They make their money really on licenses. So if you want modification capabilities in SharePoint, you need to get the licensing for that product. And we'll also take a look at, I just want to remind you also, these are only good, OWA will only work with claims-based authentication. Now our web apps in 2013, by default, that's all you can create as a claims-based authentication type web app, however, unless you use PowerShell. Even then, it's a little sketchy in how that works. So unless you've taken a 2010 web app and upgraded it and didn't convert it to 2013 claims-based, your OWA won't work. And I think there's a way to do that. I wouldn't suggest that you do that, but if you've done that, you're going to have issues with any web app that's trying to communicate with the OWA farm. So just a few ideas or rules or topics as far as an overview of what OWA is all about. So in OWA in 2010, it was just applications, service applications. That was a big architectural change between 2007 and 2010. Is we went from a shared service provider to our service applications. Well, we had a PowerPoint service application, we had Word, we had Access, we had Excel out there. Well, all the web apps, the SharePoint service applications, we deployed these individually to provide that capability, that functionality to our end users. We also, if we had multiple SharePoint farms, it remains every farm that I had, I would have to have another instance of PowerPoint, Excel, Access, whatever I may be using, or Word. And if I wanted to patch that means I had to patch SharePoint and the whole farm, because really the patch wasn't specifically for OWA, it was really the patch for OWA was part of patching SharePoint. So what they've done is kind of look at the rightmost column in 2013, now it's a separate product, a separate SKU that you have to get. And you download that product, and like I said, if it's view only, you download and install, and I'll walk you through that, or I'll show you what we've done in parts of that already. It's in an OWA farm, not to be confused with your SharePoint farm, all right? So in fact, you can't install it on a SharePoint server, and you can't install it on a domain controller. I found out the hard way, okay? Multiple SharePoint farms can use this OWA farm. So the cool thing is now I've got 3 SharePoint farms, and I've got 1 OWA farm, and that OWA farm is hosting all the content for those 3 SharePoint farms. Oh, by the way, I've got Exchange over here that's also talking to that OWA farm, and I could have Project Server also talking to that OWA farm. So it's not specific to SharePoint. We have to tell SharePoint, hey, by the way, dude, this is where you go out and get your Office web apps nowadays. So we tell them that, and we do that using a PowerShell command. So it's independent OWA patching. If you use, and I'm going to talk about this, you can scale, you can add additional machines to your OWA farm. Just like you start with a SharePoint farm, you get your primary server running, we can do the same thing with an OWA farm. We can add other instances or machines to that farm. And the cool thing about that is I can remove a machine from that farm, patch it, and then reinsert it. So I can always have accessibility to the OWA farm because I can round robin my machines in and out to get those patched. So it's independent scaling. It's independent when it comes to scaling and optimization because of the flexibility that we have. This is just what's new with OWA and SP 2013, co-authoring, installation. Again, we talked a little bit about this. We're going to talk about this in some upcoming slides. But I know, again, you're going to get all the slides for this track, for every track that you're going to. Even the tracks you don't go to, you're going to get slides for you to DVD from Combined Knowledge afterwards. So I wanted to have this slide in there so you knew what the differences were between 2010 and 2013 to OWA world. So you can just do a quick overview if someone says, so why would I want to use 2013? What's the big deal? You got some bullets to look at here. And we're going to talk about some of this when it comes to the installation as we go through this session. All right, so that's what's new in OWA. Just briefly, what's new in OWA. Again, you'll see that as you need to. Let's talk about some terminology. WOPI, W-O-P-I, I call it WOPI. I don't know what it's supposed to be called. So that's the web, and I notice the lowercase application. So it's web application. I'm going to say that. So it's web application because it's lowercase. Open Platform Interface, that's where WOPI comes from. That's the protocol that's used between what we have what are called WOPI apps or clients, and we have what are called WOPI host or servers. So when you think servers, so let's take a look at the diagram here. I don't know if this will work a little bit. I don't know if you guys will see it or not. But so this WOPI protocol down here, this dude right here, is the communication between our host and our apps. Now our Office Web App Server, our OWA Farm, is one of our WOPI apps or the client. This kind of sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? So you think that would be the server, but it's not. So that's the app or the client is where the OWA is installed. The server, the WOPI host or server, is SharePoint or Exchange or any product that's consuming from that farm, that OWA farm. To me, the terms are backwards, but Microsoft didn't ask me, so that's just my personal opinion, and I don't get paid for those. So that's the idea. So when we talk about a WOPI protocol, that's the communication between the host and the WOPI app. Now, just to throw another TLA in there, we got a WAC out there, WAC. That's the Web Application Companions. That's these dudes over here. That's the clients that are hosting this. So you might see this referred to as WAC as well. All right, is that enough alphabet soup for you guys if you weren't full before? So we got WOPI, we got WACs, we've got WOPI host and WOPI clients, WOPI servers, all sorts of WOPI going on up here. All right, so when we talk about this and communicate with this or through the next parts of the sessions, those are the terms that we're referring to there. All right, of course, there's some prereqs for this. Prereqs are Windows Server x64 2008 R2 SP1. Man, we talked about that with SQL Server yesterday. We talked about before installing SharePoint 2013. Now we need the same role, minimum role, for this environment as well, for the OWA servers. We need .NET Framework installed. If you kick off the installation of OWA, first thing it's going to do is come back to you and say, look, you don't have .NET Framework. I'm going to show you that in just a few moments. I've already installed a piece of it. I'll show you what I've installed, and I'll show you and we'll configure a piece of it together as well. If you're running Windows 2008 R2 versus Windows 2012, you also need this KB 2592525. You have to install that in order for the OWA to install. All right? You have to configure it to have certain roles. You have IS7. You have to be using PowerShell because this is driven by PowerShell, PowerShell 3.0. And IE 8 or later, and then or IE 8 or later. IE 9 is preferred, and then of course IE 10. Anybody using IE 10 yet? Feedback? Good? Yay? May? Anything? Any big jump? Again, I'm one of those where I'm like, I haven't jumped to it yet. I want to see if there's anybody have any rules like don't do it because of? If you're SharePoint 2007, it causes issues. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm not in 2007. Anybody still running 7 out there? A few of you? Okay. Are you going to jump to 13 soon? Thinking about it? Okay, cool. All right, so IE 10 with 7, not so good. So we know that now. OWA server requirements, dedicated server. Again, no SharePoint, no domain controller. Anything that uses by default port 80, 443, or 809, you're going to have issues when you install OWA. Or the installation will go successful, but when you try to access it, you're not going to be able to get the documents to be either editable or viewable. All of the servers have to be in the same Active Directory domain. So my SharePoint server and my OWA farm servers have to be part of the same domain, okay? You can't install it on a domain controller. I found out this the hard way. It'll install, and you'll actually be able to configure it, and then when you try to access it, you'll have an issue trying to access it from SharePoint, okay? I even said, okay, no big deal. I learned that the hard way. I ran DC promo on a domain controller, and I uninstalled Active Directory. I still had the same exact issue. So if it smells Active Directory on a server, you're going to have issues. So make sure it's clean, no bits of any sort of Active Directory have been installed. It's not going to install, you don't need SQL Server. Probably on the few products out here, we don't require SQL Server. No database is going to be built. All right, it's always going to just have the applications hosted and running for you. This is a great opportunity for use virtualization, Hyper-V or VMware, whatever of your choice. Yes, sir?
Is dynamic memory supported?
I'm sorry?
Dynamic memory.
Dynamic memory, it is supported. Remember, SharePoint's going to have an issue with that because of the distributed cache, but with this OWA, it's a completely separate animal, okay? Single server farm, that's what we can start with. That's what I'm going to talk through slides as if it's an HTTPS farm, using a secure sockets layer. I'm going to talk through it as if we're to configure it for network load balancing. I'm going to talk to it as if we have multiple servers, but I've only built a single server farm, all right, for OWA. So we're going to see on how you should deploy it, and I'm going to show you how I deployed it because I had limited images to work with. So single server farm, but we can add servers for high availability and to improve performance. We can actually have servers performing different roles, and I'll introduce those in just a few moments. Usually, if you have about 20,000 users, I literally 2 minutes before this, excuse me, 2 minutes before this presentation, I threw that not on domain control in there, and I just realized I bopped the slides down a little bit too far, the bullets. But about 20,000 users you should be able to host 20,000 users on a single server. So depending on the number of users will determine whether or not you should start ramping up and adding some additional servers. So we're going to talk through, and I'm going to show you what I've done in a single server farm, but the slides are going to reflect what you should do on a network load balanced multi-server farm and when maybe potentially with dedicated roles on those servers. So OWA farm creation, we install the OWA prereqs. I've done that. What were the 2 prereqs? That KB article 259.79.2549 BR5, whatever that was. And we need that .NET Framework 4.5, and we need the server role set up. So that's been done already for us. We're then going to run the OWA setup to install the bits on that OWA farm, my first machine. I'm going to show you the commands for that. We're going to use PowerShell to configure OWA. We live in PowerShell, by the way. I think I mentioned that already. We use the New-OfficeWebAppsFarm commandlet to create your OWA farm. That's how I can create that farm after I've installed the bits. So remember, I've installed the prereqs. I've run the OWA setup command. Now I'm actually creating the OWA farm so it can communicate with Exchange and SQL or Exchange and SharePoint, for instance. So when I create that first server, my farm, it's kind of like my master server. It's going to hold the configuration information for that OWA farm. Now, what if I have a 3-server farm and that master server, we have problems with the master server. I can use the Set-OfficeWebAppsMachine to take one of my other servers and make that the master server. It'll move that config information over there for you. So you're not stuck in that one server being, oh, that's the only one that can host that configuration information. If I want to add additional servers, I use the New-OfficeWebAppsMachine to add additional servers to that. All right, I'll show you the command just a little bit on that. I've got it on one of these slides. Again, like I said, if I lose the master server, all the child servers still function because there's a major amount of replication. Everything I do on one server is replicated to the other server. So everybody's really just a duplicate copy of the other server, even though the master server, and that's why I can change the master server to a different server. As soon as I add that second machine, it retains the role of the master server, immediately copies config information over there. So if I should lose that master server, I have another server to take its place. Okay? So that's how we create the farm. What do I do to make SharePoint talk to it? Notice there's nothing I need to install on the SharePoint farm, on any machine in the SharePoint farm. I'm going to use a simple command, PowerShell command, called new-sp WOPI binding, and I'm going to specify the name of the server, or one of the servers, in my OWA farm. And I'll specify that. And what it's going to do for me is going to bind the entire farm, SharePoint farm, to that OWA farm. So any server in that farm, any web front-end server in that farm specifically, will be able to access or use the OWA farm or communicate with the OWA farm. I only need it run it once. All right, unless I have issues, I only need to run it once. I could set up, and when I run that, by the way, all 4 of those products are going to be available to me. All right, I'm going to have PowerPoint, Excel, Word, and OneNote. I could just say, I don't need OneNote because I don't know how to use it. Or I don't need PowerPoint. I could just run a particular application. So I use pretty much the same name. I use the same command up there, the SP WOPI binding, but I say -application, and I specify Excel. Now it's only going to allow that SharePoint farm to use that Excel. So that's going to help with my licensing. I don't have to buy licensing for all 4 products. If my users are only going to be using Excel, I just really service that Excel application from my OWA farm to my SharePoint farm. So I don't have to have every one of those products available and configured if I don't want to. Okay, you can pick and choose per apps. So when we do this, we have different roles that are introduced here. So there's the OWA server roles. We have a front-end server, kind of like a web front-end server that we're going to communicate with when we talk about our SharePoint. We have an Excel backend, a Word backend, and a PowerPoint backend. So I can create my master server, and then I can have one server dedicated to hosting my PowerPoint content. and my request. I have another server hosting my Word request, and I have another server hosting my Excel request. Notice there's not a role for one node, okay? But so that could be running on any one of these. So when you create your server, your environment, you have your Office Web Apps, all right, or over here. You have 3 web front-end servers with our network load balancing set up. And then behind the scenes, we have one dedicated to PowerPoint, one dedicated to Word, and maybe one dedicated to Excel. And maybe you can have one node that resides on, we'll say Word is probably maybe used the least. So we can host that on those as well. So we can just either leave it as a front-end server, or we can say, hey, let's set up network load balancing. We'll allow this guy to route the request to the least busiest of these servers in the background, and those servers in the background can be hosting specific applications. So what that gives us gives the scalability that we're looking for, and it gives us the opportunity, if we don't really use Word, we don't really need to install that as a separate role or a separate application. And we can have multiple Excel servers if we use Excel heavily. So again, it gives us a lot of flexibility with how we build this out for our environment. Managing the OWA farm. All machines are identical, and I told you that already. Any machine can play any role. I can use a set web app role, or whatever I said back here. Let me go back a couple slides. What was it? Somewhere back here. Actually, maybe I haven't gotten there yet. Oh, I'll actually jump in the gun here. We'll wait for it. Any machine can play any role. We can dedicate a machine to a specific role, as we saw on the previous slide. We can reconfigure the farm without removing machines or reassigning roles. So I can do any type of, it's really, really flexible with what we could do with that OWA farm once we get it built. There's very, very few reasons for us to do what I call an R&R. When most people hear an R&R, they think of rest relaxation. An R&R, when I speak to it, is rip and replace. We want to avoid rip and replaces. So we don't need to do that if we want to do any configuration to our OWA farm. If you do experience issues, there's actually a command. I'm going to give you a list of all the PowerShell commands, by the way. There's a repair OfficeWebAppsFarm. So if you're kind of having issues with your farm up front, first thing I would do is just see if this web app, or this commandlet, will allow you to repair that and figure out what's going on with it. Because it digs into that config file on that master server, and it digs into there and makes sure everything's in sync in there. If something's not communicating for some reason or another, it actually will go out and try to repair that. So if you have issues with your OWA farm, make sure you try to address it first off before you start to rip and replace with that repair Office Web Apps commandlet. Patching OWA farm, patches independent of SharePoint farm. We talked about as one of the benefits or changes between 2010 and 2013. You must disconnect the machine from the OWA farm to patch it. So let's say Microsoft releases an OWA patch. You actually have to remove that. You can remove a machine and then patch it and then put it back into the farm afterwards. So you have to remove it before you apply that patch. If it's a major upgrade, and you have to uninstall the previous version. So I'm not sure what the exact version is that's out there now, but let's say it's version 1.0, and there's a 2.0 comes out with major enhancements. We actually have to uninstall. At least at this point, we have to uninstall 1.0, then install 2.0 when we're actually adding that new major version. Minor versions are okay. Major versions require us to uninstall or reinstall. Minimal downtime during the upgrade. It's a very quick process. If you've done it before, you'll see it takes 2 minutes to install this. Probably exaggerating a little bit, but being though it is minimal downtime, you still want to minimize. You want to kind of do it in your low demand periods. You don't want people having bad performance because we're actually performing an upgrade of some sort. So minimal overhead involved with the upgrade, but you want to keep in mind the idea that you don't want to do this, during our peak times. All right, so what do we need to do? So we're ready. We've got our first machine that we want to roll out. So what I've done, if it's SQL Server if you're running Server 2008 R2 Service Pack 1, you need to go in and open up Windows PowerShell. Remember, one of the requirements was Windows PowerShell 3.0. We open up Windows PowerShell 3.0, and then we import the module called Server Manager. I'm going to show you I already did this. I did this morning. You're going to see the command in there as it's run. And then we're going to run this second command called Add Windows Feature, and I won't read the rest of it to you. And what that does, it configures that server to have the appropriate roles that are required to host the OWA server farm. Okay? So we run that. If you're running Server 2012, you don't need that first step. You just run in and you actually run the commands. You also see the commands are slightly different. I'm just going to go to the bottom line. We've got inc-handwriting and then ih-ink support. Notice down here, those are combined as ink and handwriting services. So Server 12, Windows Server 12, slightly different command. You'll have access to these, these slides, so you'll be able to see this and use this at any point in time. Once we've done that, we then download from the Microsoft Download Center. We download our OWA bits, all right? If it's in 2008, we extract them from the IMG file. Once we extract those from the IMG file, we run the setup. If it's 2012, just be the way server handles the .img file, we can actually just run setup from in the .img file. We always, like everything, we have to accept a licensing agreement and make sure your attorney looks at that, because everyone has their own attorney looks at every licensing agreement that Microsoft releases. And I usually try to read mine just before I go to bed. If you have insomnia, it's really good for that. We'll accept a licensing agreement. It's kind of funny. If you don't accept it, the continue button doesn't come on, so what are you going to do? You're going to accept it and move on. And then you can specify the location. I'll show you the default location of where the bits are stored. We specify the location of where we want the bits to be installed. And then we're going to go in and we're going to create the OWA farm on that first machine using that New-OfficeWebAppsFarm. Internal URL is going to be the name of the server hosting that farm. Mine's going to be called mtpowa.microtechpoint.com. You'll notice all my servers are in my domain called microtechpoint.com. And then external, if I'm using external for SSL, I'll actually have a switch. That's optional, by the way. The external URL, HTTPS, will say wacweb01.contoso.com, or whatever that might be, for how your people are accessing the content internally, and you want them to be able to take advantage of those Office web apps. And then we'll set it up as for the SSL offloaded and the editing enabled. The editing enabled is only there for SharePoint. If you're not going to use this OWA farm, I'm assuming if you're sitting in this session you are, if you're not going to use this OWA farm for SharePoint, you don't need the editing enabled, because all the components that uses the OWA farm, the editing capability is only available or necessary inside of SharePoint. So we're going to create our farm first. Then we're going to use the following command to test to make sure the farm is there. We're going to do HTTPS, the server name contoso.com, hosting discovery. Again, I'm going to use just HTTP when I do the demo instead of HTTPS. And then I can execute the following server command to add additional servers to my OWA. So the first one, I'm going to create my master server. I use New-OfficeWebAppsFarm. And when I'm adding additional servers, because I want to use network load balancing or I want to have specific roles in some of those servers, I'm going to use the New-OfficeWebAppsMachine, okay? And now I'm going to use that. I'm going to execute that on the machine that I want to join. So this New-OfficeWebAppMachine, and then the machine to join, dash machine to join. Notice this is the server I indicated when I installed the farm, when I created the farm. Okay, so the machine, it's kind of, to me, it's a little misleading. Because when I see that New-OfficeWebAppsMachine space dash machine to join, you'd think you would specify the server that you're joining, like server 2 will say. But you're actually saying, hey, I'm already on server 2. Join this server 2 into the farm that's hosted on mtpowa.microtechpoint.com. Okay? So you specify the server, that master server that's hosting the farm, with the switch after it says the machine to join. To me, it's a little misleading on how that works, by the way. And then optionally, you can say, oh, this server I'm adding, I want it to be my PowerPoint role, or my Excel role, all right, or my Word role. So optionally, I can say, if I'm going to dedicate it to a specific role, I can do a dash role and specify Excel or PowerPoint or Word. If I don't specify that, it's going to host them all. It's going to be one of my web front-end servers and host them all. All right? Okay. Then I'm going to go into SharePoint as an administrator, and I create the binding using the new SP WOPI binding, server name of the fully qualified domain name of my WAC server. Okay? And then I'm going to go in and view that to make sure, because by default, SharePoint's going to create, you're going to see this when I go in there. What I'm hoping is, because I ran through the demo this morning and I tried to undo everything. So what happens if SharePoint by default uses internal HTTPS? That should come back. Well, I'm communicating on my specific situation. I'm communicating on internal HTTP without the S. So I need to set the binding from SharePoint to use only HTTP. All right. So if I go back here, if I go up to the top where it says allow HTTP right there on that first bullet with the new SP WOPI binding, if I don't supply the allow HTTP, by default it's going to use HTTPS and I'll be fine. I won't have to take the next couple steps. But because it's a single server environment, I'm not using HTTPS. SharePoint communicates over HTTPS, but you need to tell us, hey, dude, we need to twist you up a little bit and have you communicate over HTTP instead. So we're going to see that when you go in there. And if I set up the external farm for my Katoso, I'd also set that zone as well. And again, I'm going to walk through these commands for you. I wanted to make sure everything was on the slide, so when you get this down the road, when you get the DVD from Combined Knowledge, the slides will contain all the commands that you'll need to be able to create this farm. You got to be able to take these and use this information to build your own OWA farm and set up SharePoint to talk to it. All right, let's see what we can do here. Let's see, hopefully I haven't broken anything today. I usually try to break at least one thing a day. So I'm going to show you I have a domain controller running here. And then I have SharePoint's running on NTP01. Let me go and see if I can do this. So you see I've got my MTP-DC in my VMware. I've got MTP01, which is hosting SharePoint. And I've got an MTP OWA 2013. Now you see that one that says MTP OWA? That was a domain controller. So I uninstalled. I ran DC promo. And I tried to get this to work, and it would not work, okay? Even though I uninstalled it, there's still something in the bits that says, no, dude, you were a domain controller, I'm not playing with you, okay? So I left that in there just to show you that was my domain controller. I went through everything looked beauteous, and when I got done and got to the end of it, it wouldn't open. It wouldn't work for me. So I went back through and found an article that said, not only can you not run it on a domain controller, you can't run it on a machine that was ever a domain controller in its entire life, all right? So be aware of that. So I've got this, these three images that we have here. So we're going to go back into full screen. And we're going to go into, here's MTP01. I'm going to jump over there, MTP0WA to OWA 2013. And first off, I want to show you the default directory. All right? If I do a standard, I do what it's called a spousal installation. Everybody heard of a spousal installation? If you do a spousal installation, all you do is you hit setup. And you hit there and you go, okay, 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 okay. So it's spousal, all right, just like most of us do. I mean, not all of us, but. So I call that a spousal. If you do a spousal installation, it's going to create it in this environment here on the C drive, Microsoft Office Web Apps. You have the choice of moving that to somewhere else as you walk through the install. And you'll see here, in there you've got broadcast services, Excel services, PowerPoint services. So I just quickly go in and take a peek at this to make sure everything looks, smells, and tastes the way I want it to. But that's where if you grab a machine, you want to figure out if OWA has been installed, I'd beeline in here to see if it's in there, assuming that they didn't change the default location. But if you just do that spousal, this is where I'll end up. So that's where the bits are installed. Now the other thing is the PowerShell commands. I showed you those two PowerShell commands. This is Windows Server 2008. You're going to see if on the fourth text line down where it says the import module server manager duder, that's where because I'm running 2008, I don't need that command if I'm running 2012. And then I just cut and paste that other command that sets up all the roles, all right, for us. So that pre-configures your farm for you, your OWA farm. Now my prereqs, I think I have them on here. Let me just double check real quick, see if I put them on here. WAC server. Yeah, so here's that KB article, and here's the .NET Framework 4.5. So really, before I installed the bits, I downloaded the .NET 4.5 framework, double-clicked on the setup on it, ran it. 45 seconds later, it was done. I also downloaded this KB article, ran that. Okay, that was done. Then I ran the setup for the bits, and now I've got my OWA farm. I'm sorry, I didn't do that yet. Let me say that differently. I ran a setup for the bits. After I ran a setup for the bits, I imported and set the roles for the server on this. So that way I make sure this is all configured correctly. So that's setting the prerequisites up and installing the bits at this point. Okay? So now we want to configure this. And again, this is where I'm going to cheat so you guys don't have to watch me try to type stuff. This is where I need to tell it now using this command right here. And using this command right here, I'm going to go tell this that I know you've installed this SharePoint, the OWA, never mind SharePoint for a second, sorry. I know you've installed OWA, but now I want to make this an OWA farm, and that's the command I use to make this an OWA farm. So I'm going to Control-C that. So notice what I'm doing here, New-OfficeWebAppsFarm, internal URL is HTTP MTP OWA. Allow HTTP, again, without that, that's going to use HTTPS. And we're not, just for this demo, we're going to, because we've got a single server, we're not going to use HTTPS. But if I leave that out, it'll use HTTPS, which is what you're going to do probably in production if you have the real world network load balance, multiple roles, multiple servers. And then the editing enabled, if this wasn't going to be hosted by or accessed by SharePoint, I wouldn't need that switch. That's only saying, hey, I want to be able to, because my users are going to have appropriate licenses, I want to be able to allow them to edit documents, not just view the documents. All right, so that's what that command means. Now, let's see if we can get this baby to run. So I'm going to Control-C, and then the whole right-click. I like Windows PowerShell. It doesn't. You don't have to hit Enter. It just comes. It does that automatically for you. So new Office Web Apps. We're telling it now. We want to create a new Office Web App farm. The farm is going to be referred to as it's going to be on server MTP OWA. And once it creates the farm for us, we'll let that cook just a little bit in the background. We're then going to command. We're going to verify. We're going to actually open up a browser. And we're going to test this. And again, if this was HTTPS, that would be an HTTPS command instead of HTTP command. So we'll let this go back here to cook, see if this is done cooking. So it comes back here and it says, OK, setting enabled is true. You want to do this for your users to allow Office Web Apps. And oh, by the way, there's a little hint up there. You're going to need licenses for this if you're going to expect to be able to do editing, because I specified editing enabled. So it's giving me a friendly reminder that you need the appropriate licenses. So we'll say, yes, of course, I'm a legal person. I have all the licensing that's required for the editing capabilities. Again, not required if you're using just the read-only world. And I'll go out and make sure that those servers or those apps are configured to allow individuals to edit from inside of SharePoint. So while that's doing that, it should just take a second more here. We'll open up a browser. Gives us this information first off. Didn't have to get there yet. So here's the internal URL, HTTP MTP OWA. The certificate name, I didn't set up HTTPS, not worried about it. There's your default log location. All right, it uses uniform logging service, so it's a default logging location for that. I'll show you that on one of the troubleshooting slides, so you'll have that documented. But there's your default logging location. And there's some other parameters that can be customized when we're talking about, there's a whole category on Excel right here. All right, and what we can do with certain settings. So for optimizing your farm or improving performance with it, you can mess with some of these you can configure some of these to optimize it. We'll just put it that way. And notice we're not using secure store. Allow HTTP secure store connections. That's going to be set to false at this point. So this, again, we're all OWA. We have not even looked at SharePoint yet. Okay, I could be doing this for a non-SharePoint installation. But either way, how I'm going to host this, the only piece I've only indicated that it's SharePoint by saying I want editing enabled. So let's open up a browser here, and then we're going to type in this command that we just pasted or cut. I think I grabbed it. Control-V. And it comes back with this. I don't know what it all means, but it comes back with this. Just the big thing to look at, it makes sure you got the HTTP :/MTP OWA. I look for that, and then you'll see that it's got excel.ico up there, and there's a bunch more out there. The thing is, the only reason we type that command is if there were any issues with creating the OWA farm, we wouldn't see all this cool XML stuff. Anybody, developers out here? You want to interpret that for us? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so as long as you see something like this, I just check to make sure this part is correct for me, my HTTP :/MTP OWA. Make sure my server name is correct, and then I should be good to go. So now on the server side, so on the OWA side, that's all I need to do. Download and install those two prereqs, the .NET framework, the KB article, download and install the bits, configure the farm to have the appropriate roles, the OWA farm to have the appropriate roles, and then we just ran those one PowerShell command actually to configure it as a farm, create the OWA farm, and the second one is just to verify it was created as a farm. All right, let's get this messy code out of the way. So that's all I need to do. And if I want to remove a machine, just to show you that, I added that piece in here. Let's say I added my network load balancing, and I've got 3 machines in my farm, and I want to take one of them out of my OWA farm. I can just use that remove OfficeWebAppsMachine and specify the server name, and it removes that from the OWA farm. All right. Okay, let's jump over to SharePoint now. And so that's back this way, I believe. So now we're over on SharePoint. I got the same text file over here. Again, I'm trying to avoid you guys having to deal with me trying to type. And we're going to come in here. We just open up Central Admin. Because I want to show you that when you go into Central Admin, there's really, like I said, there's nothing for me to configure through Central Admin. We're all used to jumping into Central Admin and being able to do something in there. It's all driven by PowerShell. All right? So I'm just going to open up Central Admin. I'm also, while that's spinning up, because we're going to come back and look at this, I'm going to open up my MTP portal. So we'll get those two opened. Now, while that's opening, on the SharePoint server, now we're going to go into SharePoint PowerShell. So the other commands I ran from the Windows PowerShell environment. So these are SharePoint PowerShell commands. So I'm going to open these guys up here. Where is it? That guy right there. Let me just drag this down so it's not so much in my way. That's for my logging into my MTP portal. Let me go show you those two. Those should be open by now. Here's Central Admin, Application Management, Manage Web Apps. I've got my Manage Metadata Service Web App. I've got my portal. I've got my Record Center. I mean, no smoke and mirrors. There's nothing over here jumping as I jump around. I mean, if I even go down to System Settings, and I go to Manage Services on Server, there's nothing in here saying that I'm using OWA. Nothing in here at all about OWA, because I haven't done anything on this machine yet. And everything, all I'm going to do now is to set up a binding using that WOPI protocol between the SharePoint farm and the OWA farm. So this should get us in here. Well, it's going to get us in my portal eventually here. So again, you're not going to do a lot inside of, you're not going to do anything inside of Central Admin. It's actually going to be driven from inside of PowerShell. All right. So we've got our OWA farm built out there. It's on a separate machine. It's in the same domain, microtechpoint.com. We're now going to go in and we're going to tell it that I want to bind the server name, mtpowa. This has to be the fully qualified domain name, mtpowa.microtechpoint.com. And we want to allow HTTP. All right, so we're going to execute that. I'm going to Control-C. I don't like this right here, so I'm going to clean this up a little bit. All right, now I'm going to actually paste that command I captured. And we're just going to tell, okay, I want to make this machine, I want to tell this machine that's hosting SharePoint, I'm making it aware of my OWA farm machine. So I'll enter that. Gives us a bunch of stuff. All right, that's a technical term, by the way. But if you look in here, there's Word information in here. It's just a bunch of configuration information. So now it's configured, but what I want to do, and you'll see, it's talking to mtpowa microtechpoint.com. It's created that binding. Now we're going to do this command here, just so you guys know I can type. I'm going to type this one in just to surprise you. Get -sp WOPI. Do you guys type better when you say it out loud? I do. I don't know. For some reason, if I say it out loud, I type it better. So we're going to get that. And notice by default, SharePoint's configured to use internal-HTTPS. Well, remember, we set this up for this demo. We set this up to use HTTP. So right now, they're not going to be able to talk to each other because they're expecting a certificate. So what we need to do is set that. So we're going to set it. This is where I'm going to cheat again. You guys saw how I can type. So I'm going to Control-C that. And then we're going to paste it in here. And there's your set. And now we're saying, okay, you're telling me you're HTTPS. I need you to be HTTP. So we're going to set that. Now we'll go, I'm just going to up arrow twice to go back to the get. And you'll see now my HTTPS is now HTTP. So they should be able to talk to each other now using that. Bless you. Okay, so we've set that up. Now, if using HTTP and not HTTPS, it needs to be configured on SharePoint to use OAuth. So that's another little option that we need to configure. If you're using HTTP, as we are for this demo, so again, if you're using HTTPS, multi-server farm, you've got network load balancing, we don't need to do this next step. I'm going to do it just to make this work for this demo. But if you're using HTTP because you haven't had time to deal with HTTPS, we need to tell it, we're going to first go look at it. We're going to get SP Security Token Service configure, and that should come back up as here. me just go show you this. Where'd my command go? Right here. So we're going to grab this guy, Control-C it. Let me give it some space in here. And then I'm going to paste this guy in. And we're just going to run that, and that's set to false. And notice my comment. If previous command returns false, configure SharePoint 23 to use OAuth over HTTP. So by default, SharePoint uses OAuth over HTTPS. We need to tell it you need to use OAuth over HTTP, again, for this demo, if you're using a single standalone machine. So we do that by issuing these commands right here. First off, we're going to issue this guy. I'm going to do them one at a time here. Control-C and paste it. All right, we're going to set that variable. We're going to change that to, set it to true, because remember, what we're trying to do is change this guy that's false. We're going to change that to true, say, yeah, you can use this. Oop, that one executed already, good enough. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look at this last piece. We'll execute that guy. Now I'm going to hit my up arrow to that get command that we used. And you'll see now that the allow OAuth over HTTP is set to true. Okay? Again, we have to do that only if we're using HTTP and not using HTTPS. Okay, now we'll go back, and we've seen that now. Now, to test this, I'm going to go to my MTP portal, but notice I'm logged in as a system account. Okay? I'm going to go in, and I'm going to open up MTP fiscal budget. I'm going to say, do you want to open this? Could be harmful to your computer. I trust myself. And let's see. Give it a password. We are unable to connect right now. Please check your network and try again later. So one of another odyssey about this, odyssey, is that a word? Weirdness about this, weirdessy, is you can't test this. This won't work with a system account. Okay, so I need to log out. This is the error you'll get. If you get this, I don't need a product key, because it actually is asking for a product key, because I did say editing is it going to be enabled, so it's going to assume that I'm going to be wanting to do some editing, but I should still be able to view. But this unable to connect right now, try to network later, is because I'm logged in as a system account. So I need to log in as a non-system account. So I'm going to go ahead and just close this out here. I don't want to close out. There we go. Okay. So I am going to come down here. I'm done with all this. Let me just double check here. Before I close this out, if you want to remove the binding, I want to tell SharePoint I don't want you to communicate with that farm anymore. There's your command. Remove SP WOPI binding -all $true, and that kills that connection, that WOPI connection between those two. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this guy out here. And I'm going to just come down and log out. And I'm going to log back in as another user that's a non-system account, Brian. I don't trust that guy. I don't give him admin permissions. So we'll go log in. Then we'll go into our portal again. And it's an IE, of course. And so it's going to be Brian and my secret password. No one would ever be able to guess it. So I'm going to connect now as a non-system user. That's the only way you can test this, is you have to log out from the system account. And now I'm back. I'm logged back into the same environment, but now I'm logged in as a non-system user, admin user. And now we'll hit this guy here. You'll see it's using the word web app. And here's my document. Now again, I don't have editing turned on. I don't have the licensing turned on, so I won't be able to edit this. But you'll see now that people can view documents now, at least. And if you have the licensing configured correctly, they'll be able to modify these documents: OneNote, Word, PowerPoint, or Excel. And now we've got a separate farm that's hosting all my Office web apps, and I'm communicating with it using SharePoint. So I don't have to worry about those service applications that we had in 2010. Okay, so that's how you configure that and get that all set up to talk to each other. So a few things that I learned the difficult way is if you even smelled domain controller before, if you even typed in domain controller on that machine, not DC promoter, I wouldn't do it. Right? For some reason, I dug through this and I installed the services. I started to look at the registry. It's like, I'm just digging myself a hole here. So I just literally, fortunately, I had a copy of this VMware image that I never installed domain Active Directory on. So I just reverted back to that, and it's worked fine since then. But normally what happened here, if this was a domain controller at any point, when I click on to open the document as a non-system user, that brief thing that come up opening Word app, Word web app, or whatever that was, it just sits there. And then 5 minutes later, roughly 5 minutes, it'll come back out and say server is busy. And so again, I tried it several times and discovered, nope, this thing smells the bits of Active Directory somewhere in there. So I just reverted all the way back to a non-Active Directory. So you can't take a machine and downgrade it from a domain controller. It still knows it was a domain controller somewhere. So be careful about that. Okay. So that's that. What time do we? I think we're still okay. So that's the configuration that we went through out here. Really, I'm just going to go back a few slides. So when I first jumped in there, I had showed you the Windows PowerShell command. Isn't that the high screen? The Windows PowerShell command. I showed you that I had just run that just before the demo because again I was concerned about time. So I ran the install of the bits. I'd already done that. I downloaded and ran the install of the bits. I accepted the license agreement. I took the default installation setter, as you saw, because they were in that C drive. And then I went in there. Then in the demo, we actually went into the PowerShell command. I did a non-HTTPS PowerShell command, because I only have a single server machine. After we did that, I verified that the farm existed by entering this command here in the Internet Explorer browser. We then went in and executed, or we didn't do any of the additional machines at this point here, so we'll skip that piece. We then went into SharePoint and we created a binding between the OWA farm and the SharePoint farm. Need to do it once and that's it. And then we were able to test the binding and saw that it was HTTPS. Oops, sorry, we're supposed to be on HTTP. We configured that. Then we configured it for OAuth because over HTTP, because that's not configured by default. And then after we did that, we were able to go in and execute or open that document. These are all the commands that you need to know. On the left side, it has all the PowerShell commands for the OWA farm, okay? On the right side are all the commands that you have for options on the SharePoint farm that's going to communicate with that WOPI farm or that OWA farm. So really, there's only a few dozen commands, a couple dozen commands that you need to know to configure that, to really manage, configure, troubleshoot that environment. Again, I threw these on here so you guys will have access to the slide and you'll be able to see these or understand what these all are. Troubleshooting tips. Ensure your WOPI zones set properly on OWA farm and compare to SharePoint farm. We would have had issues because one was HTTPS, one was HTTP. They have to be talking the same language. So we can check that by using the command here. So we did that when I first created the OWA farm. Then over on the SharePoint farm, I double checked to make sure that we had the appropriate number or the appropriate configuration of SharePoint, the HTTP versus HTTPS. And then because we were using HTTP, I ran that the OAuth configuration. Default logging location, we saw that when we created that. We can change that using the Set-OfficeWebAppsMachine PowerShell. Because notice where it's going by default. It's on the C drive. We love logging on the C drive. Everything logs to the C drive by default. It's a good thing we don't leave it that way. I mean, SharePoint itself would be a nightmare. But if you don't want it to the default logging location, I didn't have an option during the installation, but you can reset it to a different location by using this PowerShell command here. Don't access OWA documents using the system account. All right, you saw what happened when I tried to log in and access that document using the system account. I had to log out, log in as Brian in order for me to open that up. Don't install any Office product on an OWA server. No SharePoint, no Exchange, no anything that's got to be kind of dedicated to another server. So I don't know, Microsoft, isn't Microsoft didn't help, they just helped build out Dell or something like that? Yeah, there's something going on there. Now we have to buy another server, but we could have this virtualized. So this is a great opportunity for virtualization, by the way, using OWA in a virtualized environment. Multiple servers, network load balancing, sweet, all right? Best practices, deploy OWA in a multi-server load balance farm using HTTPS. I didn't show you a best practice. I'm talking to you about a best practice. I showed you a worst practice, so I'm doing it by HTTP, all right? So don't do everything I do, just do it better by using HTTPS, creating that certificate and getting that set up. Yes, sir?
When you say load balance, I'm assuming we have to configure load balancing.
Yeah, so what you do is if you go back, remember that little image I had? I had 3 servers that were set up. You can set up NLB, and then you set those servers up to as your front end servers.
SharePoint isn't aware of child server on its own.
No, exactly. Ensure sufficient memory on your OWA servers, because there should be huge documents with 10, 20,000 users opening up documents, especially if you've got editing turned on. Encrypt traffic between servers using IPsec. Again, we didn't do that, but I want you to do that. Turn off Microsoft updates on the OWA servers. Turn it off on every server, but because we're talking about OWA this particular session, I'm just not a big fan of automatic updates, and I'm sure some of you have probably been burnt with that before. And you can create an OU inside of Active Directory just for your OWA servers. So if you're going to have multiple servers, create an OU in Active Directory so you can set up policies on those, on that organizational unit in Active Directory and how you want that policy or that those specific computers to be managed. All right, that was it. Any questions? Yes.